Okay, so in fact what I'm going to do here is create a new div with class row as well. So we'll have a second row in this view, and this ID will make post index content. And then I'll have a class where we'll have a column here. So we'll have column of width 3, sorry about that, column medium 3, and we'll call this the post author container. And then we'll have a div with class post author image. And here we'll set the style so that we can actually supply the background image inline. And for now, I'm actually just going to maximize Visual Studio while we fill out this part of the view. And so we should have the author image URL on our view model that we can use here. Oops, and just fix this typo. Okay, so we'll just close off the div. And of course we have to close off the starting tag as well. And then we'll put the author name, but we're going to wrap that in an anchor tag here to link over to our author's profile. So that it's of course in the profile controller in the detail action. And the route ID is the main reason we need to pass the author ID down on the model, on the view model. So that anchor tag will wrap the author's name, and the link will go to the author's profile page, which of course we'll be writing in a future video here. And then we'll post a little bit more metadata about the actual post, so the post date. And then what I'm going to go ahead and do here is write a conditional where we'll say if the author is an admin user, and we'll need to add that to our view model. Then we're going to create a little admin badge here that we can display on the post. And we'll just apply some CSS styling that again we'll add to our site.css here shortly. And model.date should be model.created, sorry about that. And so our badge will just have the text admin. And then finally, as far as the sort of post content section is concerned, we'll have another div here. That'll be our column with the width of 9. And this will actually be our post content container. And within this, we'll have our post content. And what I'm actually going to do here is use the @html.raw. And we're actually going to pass the post content back as raw HTML. Okay, since we're good on the post row now, we're going to have a row that will sort of serve as a divider between this row and the replies. So we're going to have another class row, and we're going to have an ID of reply divider. And then here's where I'd like to put a little section which will appear only if the user is authenticated. Now again, we have access to this user object, and so we can say if the current user viewing this page is authenticated, then we're going to render some more HTML out here. And in fact, this will be a div class row. And this is just simply going to be a row that holds a simple span with a link on it that's styled as a button in order to post a new reply. So for that, we'll actually have to build out a reply controller and have a create action on it, to which we'll definitely want to pass the post ID, because every post has the reply objects on it. So we'll style it as such, and we'll also have, we'll apply a class of button, which is our bootstrap button, and then a custom reply button here. So we'll say like button, new reply, and then the text will just be post reply. Okay, I'm gonna just put this out on a separate line so it's a little bit easier to read. Likewise for the span. And then so what I'm going to say here is that if the post has any replies, then we're going to create a similar container that we have for our post, actually for each of the replies. So I'm just going to go ahead and write that up very quickly. And again, here we'll also put these admin badges on the replies of authors of replies who are admins. And we'll need to add that property to our replies listing object as well. And then a simple section here for the reply content as well. Okay, so we have this big if block here to say that if there are any replies. And so we can have an else block here with just a very simple div of class no posts with an h3 tag in it where we can just say like there are no replies to this post. Okay, and with that I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the old template that we had created just to kind of get everything working, and then we'll take a look at the various properties that we need to add. So to our post index model we'll need to add this bool is admin property and then figure out how to wire that up in our controller, and we'll need to do the same thing on our reply is author admin property, and here the reply should be created on, I believe. And we'll go ahead and add that property as well. So model.replies is this collection of post reply models, so we can actually just F12 here and then take a look at our post reply model. And it looks like, okay, created is the datetime on our reply object, not created on. And so that datetime object is going to be implicitly converted down to a string here, and we could control its formatting again by calling .toString and passing in some string formatter here, but for now what we're going to do is just go ahead and pass it down just as the raw converted datetime object, and we'll head back into the replies model where we can click on this post reply model, and here we'll go ahead and stop the server so that we can add a bool is author admin. And so I'll just hit the back button and we'll do the same on the post index model here, although I called that property bool is admin. Call it, we'll call it is author admin. And then down in our index view, rather than is admin, we'll call this is author admin. Okay, so now let's go to the post controller index action and be sure to set these properties. Keep in mind we need to set it on the post index model itself, here, as well as on the each of the replies that comes back. So we'll go over to our post controller, which is in our controllers folder here, and then post controller. And if we scroll down to index, which is at the top here, what I'm going to do is create a new method for this, but we're going to say is author admin, and we're just going to pass the actual application user to this new private method. So we have access to the user from the post that we get back, and so now I'll control period here, and we'll go ahead and complete this private method. So here we're just going to actually once again invoke our user manager, and we have this method get roles async, and we can pass that again our application user instance here, and then we can block on it and wait for the result to come back here by just calling result. And then we can see if that result, which will be a collection, you can hover over and see here, this is going to be basically a list of ultimately strings that comes back from this task. And so we can just say, does that result contain admin? And so now this entire method returns a Boolean, and it basically just depends on the result of this get roles async method getting called with our user. And so if the roles come back and they contain an admin role, then we can be sure that this author is an admin user. Likewise, as we mentioned when we were looking at the replies here, we have this other method that where we build out the post replies. And so we'll have the isAdmin property here as well, and we can reuse that private method. In this case, just grabbing the user from the reply. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and move this private isAuthorAdmin method down towards the bottom of our class with the other private methods. And Control-Shift F9 to get rid of existing breakpoints. And then let's go ahead and fire up the server and take a look at our post page. Now we may need to continue to add to our styles in our site.css, but we just want to make sure that the page can now still be built properly. Okay, so we'll head over to a post, and yeah, page builds properly. We can see that there are no replies to this post. We have some post content here. Of course, we haven't set up any of the user images yet, and we haven't exactly finished the styling on the post either. So let's do a couple of things. First, what I'm going to do is just to get the user profile image active, we're going to go ahead and do a manual SQL insert, and then very shortly after, when we work on the profile pages, we're actually going to hook up our cloud storage with Azure blob storage, where we can actually upload images to the cloud. But for now, since we have some local test images, sort of fixtures to work with, which are of course here, if we just take a look at the Solution Explorer and then go into our www root folder with our static files, here we have this images directory where I just dropped in the various images that we can use as kind of fixture files here. So what I'll do is in our SQL database, let's go ahead and select star from ASP NET users. We'll just grab this user ID, and we're going to run an update on this record, and we're going to populate the profile image URL with a relative path to one of our static files. So we'll just say update ASP.NET users set profile image URL equal to, and in this case it's going to be the relative path to our image from our static files directory. So it'll be images / users, I believe. Yeah, users, and then we'll just say user0.png. Okay, and just correct a spelling error here. And we don't really need a where clause, in fact, since we only have one user, although it would be good practice to do it, so I'm just going to go ahead and do it. Let's say where ID is equal to this. Okay. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and run this update. And so now if we select star from users again, ASP.NET users, we take a look, we now have a profile image URL to reference. So what I'm going to do is minimize the window here from SQL Server and then open up our web page again and just go ahead and refresh the page. And it doesn't look like our image is actually getting put out on the page. So we're going to go ahead and inspect this, and we'll take a look in our post heading, and then actually in our post index content here, we have our post author container, and we should be getting a relative path here to our user. In fact, it does look like I think that this may be an issue with our styling. So let's go ahead and work on that a bit here. We'll close the inspector and we'll unpin our Solution Explorer here. And so let's head back into our index.cshtml for our post index. And we need to continue on completing the styling for this page anyway. So let's go ahead and finish that up. And we'll actually very quickly reopen the Solution Explorer so that we can head back and edit our site.css and then unpin it again. And actually, in fact, we had written some styles for our post here for the post page. So yeah, like we had the title and the subtitle, this sort of thing, and the post logo. So now we need to kind of pick up where we left off here and supply a class for post author image, and we'll set the height and width on that. So we'll set it to 80 pixels height and 80 pixels width. And then we'll also have our post author container here, where we'll just apply some basic padding of 12 pixels. We'll set maybe the font color to be a slightly lighter gray, and the font family we'll set to Roboto. In fact, we probably don't need to set Roboto explicitly everywhere in so many of these classes. We could just supply it sort of in the body, but we'll leave that for a refactor exercise here. And then I'll specify a width, in this case of like 190 pixels. Okay, we had a class for the post index title, and so we'll set the font size there to 1.4 EM, and then we had an ID for the post content container, which is an important one for us, and which will set the font family in here to Roboto explicitly. Apply a darker color, have a padding of 22 pixels, and then we'll set the left border here 1 pixel solid and sort of a light gray. And then we also had a div of class post author rating, and the font size here will be a bit smaller. And we'll make the color a kind of gray blue type color, and we'll set the font family here to Roboto Mono. Okay, so we refresh the page, and yeah, so we can start to see it come together. Looks like we need to resize the profile image here. So what I'm going to do is, rather than do that inline, what I'm going to do is actually do it in our CSS file here. So post author image, where we set the background image for that div. So I'll scroll up a bit. Post author image, what I'm going to do is say background of 100%. Okay, and so now you can see our profile image coming through a little bit more nicely here. Looks like the heading still isn't formatting well, and we need a background to our post here. So let's go ahead and figure that out. Head and give the actual page a little bit more real estate on the screen, and then inspect our post div. And so it looks like we've assigned a post index content ID here. And so we need to go ahead and create the styling for that as well. As I've mentioned previously here, if working through the styling isn't necessarily your thing, then of course I would highly recommend just copying the styles from the project resources for this series. And yeah, if you don't want to make any customization to it, and yeah, if you don't And yeah, if you don't want to see a lot of this sort of manually come together, then you could just simply copy and paste that file into your project and skip forward through the sections that are more interesting to you, if that's the case. In any case, we'll keep working through here. So we'll have a background color of white, post index content, and I'm also going to apply a bit of a box shadow here. Okay, so we have a little bit of a more elaborate box shadow here. I'm just gonna fit it all on the screen, and we'll close our inspector for the time being. And if I refresh the page now, we're starting to see that post kind of come together here. Oops, and I can actually see one of the errors here. This post content container should actually be a class, I believe. So let's go ahead and refresh. Okay, so now we get some of that, the padding and the border on the left side here. And if we actually just open it up in full screen, we can see that it looks a little bit better on full screen than it currently does, made smaller. So that's something that we could actually make a little bit more responsive. But let's continue to just go ahead and get the heading here worked out, and then build out some more of the functionality in our application by working on these replies and also working on our user profiles. So we'll go ahead and wrap up working on the heading here. So if we just go ahead and inspect this, so you can see that this is in our div class post heading, and it has a class post index title on the inside, as well as this heading button. And in fact, all of that is in a row with class post header. So we'll need to actually create that as well. So I'm going to come down here and we'll create a class post header. And let's give that a dark background. So we'll say background color of a dark gray here with like 212121, and we'll apply some padding to it as well to kind of keep things spaced nicely from the edges. Okay, so we'll go ahead and refresh. And so that's starting to look a little bit better. We've got this kind of weird offset here happening, so let's go ahead and fix that. For that, I'm going to head back and index that CSHTML file. And the problem here is that our container body content is actually closed off. We need to remove the div tag here and put it down towards the bottom. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and format everything. By the way, if you highlight everything, and let's go ahead and refresh our page now. And so yeah, that lines up a little bit more nicely. So now the last thing on this page, apart from the replies, is really to just style this button. That's going to take us back to our forum index. So let's go ahead and do that. So back in our site.css, finally, I'm just going to go ahead and paste that in here. And I'm going to have a section for custom button stylings. Okay, so this is our back button. And so we're going to have it change color a little bit when we hover over it, and have that little bit of transition, which is kind of nice. And I'm going to paste in similar styles here for our new reply button. And we have just a few other styles for buttons throughout our application, so I'll continue pasting them in here. We have a button for attaching files that we'll look at in just a little bit. Then we've got a new post button. That'll be the button we see for creating a new post. And we have a submit post button, which will be on that new post form. I think that should about take care of it. So let's go ahead and refresh the page here. And yes, we have this back to Python button. And if we go ahead and inspect it, it's inside of a heading button span ID. So what we're going to do here also is go ahead and create that selector, and we can create that back above here where we have some more of our post styles. And I'm going to call it heading button. And all we're going to do is float it to the right and apply a margin on the right side of 20 pixels. Okay, so now we can go ahead and refresh the page here. And so now that button floats to the right side of this div and is 20 pixels from the edge here. So when we click it, we head back to our Python forum page.